Just a note before we start. Our show talks about touchy subjects that may be difficult for some of our listeners. Take care of yourself. If you feel you need to seek help, see the links at the end of our show notes for resources.
Hey y'all, and welcome to Touchy Subjects Podcast, the podcast that aims to break the silence that tends to come with conversations around domestic and sexual violence. I'm Sean.
And I'm Amanda.
And today we're going to be discussing men being abused in their relationships with our special guest, Heather Claus. So thank you for joining us again today, Heather.
I'm so happy to be here.
We are so happy to have you back. And if you have not heard our previous episode last season with Heather, please go and check that out. But for those of you who have not heard that episode, Heather, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to our audience?
Oh, I suppose. So hi, I'm Heather. Actually, the Reverend Heather, aka Nookie Claus. I am a licensed unicorn quester. That's new. And I'm an author and relationship coach. I have ADHD. I have been in an abusive relationship, recovered myself, and have been over 11 years in a relationship beyond my wildest imagination. I am also non-monogamous. I am kinky. And I have taught relationships and lifestyle stuff for over a decade now.
Oh,
You just got a lot of stuff you're bringing to our audience, and we really appreciate that. But however, I do need to just real quick, I'm sorry, licensed.
A licensed unicorn quester. So
This has nothing to do with the podcast, but I need to know a little bit about that right now.
I need to know.
So Lake Superior University has a license, a unicorn questing license. It used to be a unicorn hunting license, but of course, they changed that because we don't really want to hunt the magical unicorns. We want to quest after them and safely release them back into the wild. And I got my certificate. So it's just part of the magic that is me, right? Like, how many titles will I be able to die with? That's the question. I'm working on my ladyship right now. So, yeah.
That's so exciting. I'd heard of the unicorn hunting license, but I didn't realize that the name had changed. And so that is super cool. And that just makes me love you all the more.
And also, like, one of the jokes is that, for those who are not in the know, in like non-monogamy, polyamory, swinging, that sort of thing, a unicorn is generally a third that a couple will sort of cull off of the herd and sort of like isolate and bring in, which is a kind of abuse in and of itself. So I feel by getting licensed that I am now able to distinguish between ethical and non-ethical unicorn questing, and that allows me to make a lot of jokes.
That's awesome.
Perfect. That's all that anything in our life should be geared toward, right? Is how much humor and how many like weird things can we bring into it?
Oh, absolutely, especially when we're talking about topics like abuse and boundaries and like I like to say, you know what? Being a stick in the mud isn't going to make what I teach more effective. And it's going to make it less fun for me and less interesting for you, and also potentially less effective. So I'm not going to do that. Like, I got my creds, but let's have some fun with this.
Yeah. I totally get the just wanting as many titles as possible. I was really disappointed when I learned that to get the Esquire title, you have to like actually have a like law degree and everything. I was like, that's too much work for a title. I'm sure there's other ones that are fun,
And
more
it's
fun.
such a cool title.
I know. It's not fair.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now that we've gone completely off the rails a little bit, let's start with what we're here to talk about today.
It's all right going off the rails, but yes. So we want to talk about men being abused in relationships in part because this is a subject when we talk about abusive relationships that often gets overshadowed just because when we're talking about abuse in the grand scheme of things, it is often men who are the perpetrators of abuse. But that does not mean that men will not be victims. So if we were to ignore that men can be victims in the first place, we're losing the ability to actually have a conversation with them about what it could look like if they were abused in that relationship. So we really wanted to bring this kind of to the forefront for this episode because, one, as a man who has experienced some forms of abuse in relationships previously, it is something that is fun for me to talk about. But I think it's really important for men to realize, like, yes, this can happen to us too, and we need to be able to talk about it.
And it also gives us the opportunity to, for so many decades, many people have really pushed the idea of abusive relationships as a woman's issue. And we're really trying hard to kind of change that mentality. Um, and one way to kind of help change that mentality is to acknowledge the abuse that men also will experience potentially in their lives. So it's great on all fronts.
Yeah, I think it's super important to say that in what I've been doing over the past decade plus, um, I am very gender neutral. I really look at targeting of behaviors versus gender. And there is a lot to be said for how the genders are socialized based on their outward appearance through their early years until they can fully take control of their own experience. And that puts men and women, generally speaking, on different paths. Even when they're being abused, it looks different, it feels different. It's incredibly challenging to look at one and say, yes, I'm experiencing that from the other in a one-to-one fashion a lot of the time, unless it is very specifically purely physical abuse. And even then, it's difficult for men to see it in the same way, or for women to recognize it in themselves when we are the perpetrators of abuses, um, or in others towards the men that we care about, our fathers, our sons, our brothers, our friends. When it is done specifically by non-men. When we look at men and
Mhm.
men, it's often easy to say, oh, well, that's recognizable because we're taught to see that. But the other way, not so much. And I think it's really important to have these conversations because as much as we don't want to go through this ourselves, we also don't want those we love to go through this. And for me, specifically as somebody who has been abused, there have been times I've caught myself being abusive emotionally from my own trauma.
Mhm.
And I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that to someone I love. Right. So it's a big thing to talk about.
Yeah, and if you look at, the media that we consume, um, the the double standard that is out there in the world that like we allow these things to be in the forefront of a media, but if the roles were reversed, it would be, you know, the sky would be falling down. You've got so many movies where there's an argument between a man and a woman, and, maybe he did something that he cheated, he whatever, and she'll haul off and just slap him. And that's just shown as okay, right? Because that's fine. And then you've got the Carrie Underwoods of the world, like writing their songs about how they're using a bat to break the
Mhm.
window of their ex's car, whatever. And those things are top sellers, right? And we allow that. But if the roles were reversed, if that was a man doing those things, the
Mhm.
whole world would be able to recognize that that's abuse. Like,
Mhm.
but we just don't, we,
Because when we look at it from the perspective of so many women have been abused
Mhm.
at the hands of men and or masculine images in their lives. And we have been taught, right, that we have to, make ourselves small. When we see those things, it feels like taking power back
Mhm.
as opposed to taking our power, but not crossing that line. And that goes back to like a lot of the things we talked about in the last episode when we were talking about abuse and boundaries specifically. Like
Mhm.
what is the boundary of who we are willing to be and how we are willing to show up for ourselves, and what we are not willing to do. And then looking at others, what are we not willing to accept on behalf of the people that we care about?
And one of the things that you mentioned a little bit earlier when you were talking, Heather, and the example like you gave Amanda of a woman slapping a guy, and we view that as being perfectly acceptable and fine. When we're looking at men in relationships with women, if a woman were to physically assault a man, when we talk about physical abuse, we talk about it often as like it's a physical action done to hurt someone else.
Mhm.
Well, as a man, if I'm physically hit by a woman, one, I have to like question and like, well, did this actually, quote unquote, actually hurt me? Um, and if it did actually hurt me, I was like, well, it was from a woman though, so like it shouldn't have hurt because women are supposed to be quote unquote weaker. So like, is it actually physical abuse because they're hitting me, but it didn't really hurt?
So I think
And,
the
it,
key
and
is
even if it did, can I admit that it actually hurt?
Yeah,
Because
that. Yeah. And in
yeah,
this case, I think it's also important to remove the concept of does it hurt
yeah.
and make it does it harm?
Hmm.
Because the harm is the key. Like I've talked to so many abuse victims, DV, etc., who were also emotionally abused.
Hmm.
And many of them say, I mean, and this is not like oppression Olympics or anything like that, but many of them say that the physical harm that they suffered was nothing compared to the emotional scars and trauma they carry forward.
Hmm.
So if you are doing something, like I once had a man, let's just talk about this. I once had a man tell me that he was asking about like how do I not trigger trauma in women? And I'm like, well, you don't know. Like nobody knows what all of their traumas are. And he's like, I don't have trauma. Okay, buddy, let's start right there, right? So let's talk about what trauma looks like in a man. Trauma, here's one simple thing. Trauma looks like avoiding a topic, because when that topic has been brought up before, he has been yelled at, he's been emotionally manipulated, maybe he's been slapped. Several times that happens, and suddenly he's not talking about that topic anymore, right? He is doing everything in his power to avoid that topic. Now the challenge is, of course, that sometimes what they're going to do is they're going to lie and they're going to cheat and they're going to like sneak around. But the trauma, the original trauma is I cannot bring myself to this conversation without emotional backlash, which, let's be clear, generally speaking, women can run emotional circles around most men. It's not because we are innately better at it. It's because of socialization. We are
Hmm.
not told to hold all of our emotions in and stick them away in the back. Somebody once said on social media that women are often sad when they should be angry. And I said, and men are often angry when what they're really feeling is sad,
Hmm.
right? And so in an emotionally charged conversation, oftentimes a man who is deeply in love with somebody is going to find that emotional manipulation irresistible. Like he's just gonna like give in. And that happens enough. And then he can't speak about that topic. And it becomes a black hole, right? Because that topic touches on these topics, which then cause arguments. And then he goes into every other relationship he ever has, not talking about that topic, avoiding it, and probably getting in trouble for it, but not understanding where the trauma came from and that it actually is trauma. It's just, well, I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd be upset.
Mhm.
I mean, who hasn't heard that?
Yeah.
It from any gender, right? But this is what it looks like. This is how it presents most often in men. I cannot speak to you about that because every woman in the world will be upset about that topic, because I've been slapped, because I've been yelled at, because I've been cried at, because I can't do that anymore. And it's just, yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me of this like TikTok that I saw, and obviously like, I don't know the confines of this people's relationship like at all, but it was just a guy just like sitting on his porch with like this ball of like like twine like that he had, and he's like, I've had this thing for like 20 years, and like it's almost gone, and that's like 20 years of my life. And, like he was having like this deep existential like crisis because he's like, that's 20 years of my life just like gone, and like this is almost at an end. And like his partner was completely dismissive of it.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, he's never talking about this ever again with his partner now.
That, yes, that's a perfect abuse. That is an emotional abuse right there. Right. And it's not like I hauled out and punched you in the nose.
Mhm.
But what do we look for? Like, if we're saying what is an abusive relationship from a femme perspective, invalidation,
Mhm.
gaslighting, right? What, that's so dumb. Why is that important to you? Okay, so you're doing that about a ball of twine, whereas I'm doing it about, like, the way you looked at that girl's tits or whatever. Like, I care, but whatever. That's a common one, right?
Mhm.
And they're like, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous. That's so dumb. And with men, then we also question their masculinity.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of real man would be thinking thoughts like that? I mean, aren't you supposed to get up and get the hatchet and just cut that ball of twine in two and be like, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. We put so much emphasis on making sure that men are always, even like as a guy, like it took a very long time for me to like desocialize myself from the belief like men are supposed to be big, tough, strong, stoic. We can't express our emotions. And like it's still things like obviously there's still like stuff that I do struggle with like emotionally, but when we spend so much of a boy's youth teaching him don't cry, don't express emotions, don't do like XYZ, don't do things that make you appear to be like a woman, or doing something like a girl is something that's bad. We don't learn to be able to express the full gambit of the emotions that we're going to experience because everyone's going to experience happiness, sadness, like anger. But when the only one we're allowed to express is anger, I
Yeah.
don't know how to function now effectively in a relationship at all. Because when I feel happy in a relationship, well, I can't let that show because that means I'm showing an emotion that makes me weaker. I can't show that I'm sad. So the only way I can respond to things is either by not expressing anything. So then even in the happiest moments, you don't look happy. Or in the sad moments, you're only responding with anger.
And this is something that like I work with my clients on all of the time. I'm like, tell me, I'll say, tell me right now, um, in a given day or a given week, tell me the emotions that you experience. Most can name like five or six, right? Joyous is not in there, ecstatic is not in there, a little kerfuffled is not in there, frustrated is not in there, pissy is not, like. But if you look at, even like the emotional color wheel, which if you look that up, you'll be able to find it anywhere if you'd like to. I can also give you a copy if you'd like to put it up for downloads for the show.
Hmm.
Um, but if you look at the emotional color wheel and all of the different things that we have, so let's say you even know the basic five emotions and you're fairly comfortable experiencing those. once you get over into disappointment and anger, if all you have been taught is angry, then you've got 0 or you've got Hulk smash, right? You don't have a little annoyed. You don't have peevish. You don't have frustrated. You don't have furious, right? Like you're angry, and all of your angry is the same color. Because, and so you go from 0 to 60 in no time at all, because that is the only way your brain can interpret it, because it doesn't have the other boxes. And for men specifically, like you said, we are not focused on giving assigned male at birth children the language and the understanding with which to explore their lives in full color. We're giving them black and white or sepia tones at best.
And it's unfortunate, even when you look at like studies with kids in terms of like how like emotional they are. It's like you'll see like young boys up until about the age of 4 years old will be as, if not more, emotional and expressionate than their female assigned at birth equivalents.
Right.
So it is pure socialization that we are teaching men out of those emotions. So when we are looking at it in the confines of a relationship, then if I only know how to express anger, any other emotion now can essentially be used against me
Oh,
because
absolutely.
I only recognize anger. When my partner is angry with me, I got this. I know how to handle this one. When my partner is happy, I'm like, cool, awesome. When my partner is sad, I'm like, just a pat on the shoulder, like, sorry, I can't really help you with this. I don't know how to deal with sadness. Um, so we only know how to recognize anger. So that can then look like our partners eventually saying things to us like, you just don't know how to help me when I'm sad. You don't show up for me when X, Y, or Z is happening. I was like, I don't know how to show up. I've never been taught how to do that.
So fun fact, I have a recently acquired client who was getting out of a 26-year long relationship or something like that. They tried breaking up several times. They couldn't do it, yada, yada, yada. And he comes to me and he's like, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you are my only hope, which is one of the things I love. I've recently really started specializing a lot of my, client focus into good-hearted, nerdy, kinky, or otherwise just a little bit different Gen X men who really want to like make it through dating and relationships without being a doormat or becoming a YouTube villain with a podcast, right? Like, and so this guy, he comes to me and he's like, I don't know how to navigate the final disillusion of this relationship and maintain a good relationship with the mother of my children, and also go out and seek the life that I really desire. And so he's like, please, I think you're the only person who can help me. And I'm like, I am absolutely happy. And then before our first like real discussion, we had a little consultation. But before the first real discussion, he sends me like a 5-page, like, this is my history, yada, yada, yada. I'm so glad to finally have somebody to tell all of this to. And I'm practically crying while I'm here speaking, like type it. And then just a little further on, he's like, and I'm always the one who's super stoic and I never have any emotions. And then the same thing happened in our conversation face to face. Like he is so effusive and excited and enthusiastic and grateful. And then just a few minutes later, when he's talking about his family, he's like, well, I don't really have emotions like they do. And I hear this over and over and over again because men are told they cannot have feelings. It is not manly to have feelings. And therefore, if you're a man, all of these things that you do are reactions,
Mhm.
not feelings. And that's huge, right? Because you can react to something and be like, well, it's logical that I reacted that way because of X, Y, and Z. But what you're doing is feeling. Because and I'm saying that this is abuse to men in the sense that how can they feel when every feeling they have is met with invalidation and scorn and by women, even men that have been told by their wives for decades, I need you to be more emotional with me. As
Hmm.
they begin to do that, the women are like, no, not like that.
Yeah.
That doesn't match the emotional in my head that I want you to be.
Mhm.
That is abuse, right? Like that's very much a, if you look at it from a woman's perspective, I need you to be the perfect mother. No, not like that. Only the perfect mother in the way I need you to be. It's your fault I hit you.
Yeah.
It's the same trap on both sides. It just looks different through the funny house mirror.
There were so many dates when I was younger that I was afraid to go to the movies with. Like, I love movies, absolutely love movies.
Are you a
I was,
crier?
I'm a crier.
I
Like,
love that.
absolutely. Like, it can be any movie. If there's like even like the slightest hint of like a sentimental moment, I'm uh, like I will start tearing up. Um, and I was terrified to go to any movie that had a chance of having that sentimentality. Like, I love horror movies, so that worked out great. It's like, let's go to a horror movie. I'm not gonna have that sentimentality moment in that horror movie, so I should be fine. I was wrong because there's some like horror movies that do have those. So fun fact. um, but my main reason was, as a man, I've been told do not cry because that's not a good thing to do. But having heard from somebody that I was dating that they thought it was a turn off for them that I would cry.
Yeah.
So every other relationship from that point, I was like, can't do it, can't cry. So I would just avoid going to see those movies. I would avoid situations where like it was gonna make me be emotional to where I would tear up because I knew if I did that, I'm running the chance of also ruining this relationship now because I'm emotional.
Right. And when we're young and we're forming those thought processes, we don't realize that if this person doesn't like the fact that we cry at movies, they're not a viable partner.
Right.
Right? Like even in adulthood, like I know humans that I work with who are still trying to figure out how to fit themselves into what other people want instead of how to build a life that they can live being wanted for who they are. And but it's so funny. I had never seen The Sound of Music. And so like 2 years ago, my partner it's a snowy night. He's like, we have to watch The Sound of Music. It's amazing. You have to see it with me. Okay. So the opening scene and Maria's, out in the hills and she starts, twirling around and she goes, the hills are alive. And I'm watching and I hear, and I look over and I'm like, babe. He's like, it's just so beautiful. Like I tease him mercilessly about it, but in a way that like all of my girlfriends are like, "Oh my God, that's so cute. Rodney, do you really cry about?" Like he's like, "Yeah. Yeah, I'm waterworks." Like like I can't even tell every episode of Ted Lasso. We were watching Shrinking last night, one of the episodes. He's like it's just
My partner does the same thing.
love it.
She
I
makes
love
fun of, like, we'll joke about it because like we joke basically all the time about how our relationship kind of like already has the gender roles flipped on their head where like she's the breadwinner, I'm the one who like tends to like do most of the cooking in our house. Like, we're already like flipping a lot of those anyway, so it makes sense that I'm the crier and she is absolutely not the crier. Like, I've seen this woman maybe cry like 6 7 times in our 5 year relationship and she's seen me cry probably 6 or 7 times in the past like couple weeks. uh, so it's like there's the difference. But it's like we'll be watching One Piece, and like I'll just be over there just like tearing up while we're watching something or so. And this
That's always
morning, this
that's always
morning
what I hear.
I was leaving the house. My wife will turn on like Disney movies before we leave because like we'll have like my mom or one of her aunts or her parents like coming over to watch our kid. So she turned on Brother Bear, and I love Brother Bear. It is my favorite Disney movie. But like knowing that where they were at the salmon run, where like he's about to realize that Kenai killed his mom, I was like leaving the house. I was like tearing up as I was leaving. So like I
Oh,
know what's coming, and I feel bad for Coda. So it's like anytime, it's anything. Like you can probably see it right now. Like I know this scene distinctly.
that is so cute. But and see, this is the thing. Like when we have been in abusive situations, whether it's, as women, whether it's, when we were young, whether it's, a relationship or multiple relationships or whatever, we also have a skewed view of how humans are supposed to be, of what emotional availability looks like. And we also know deep down inside that we know how to cry to make things less in some cases. Like I learned how to cry at when I needed to make my husband less mean sometimes. I also knew how to get him more mean and get that abuse happening now instead of later when we had people coming over or whatever. And knowing how we have survived these things, we can also have a tendency to look at emotions, especially the ones that we would show, as less sincere, right? And also, like, it's just so hard on all of us to try to navigate this. Like if any of the women out there who are listening, if you hear anything during this conversation and you go, well, shit, I've done that. Take a deep breath, give yourself a hug, and say, I didn't know better.
Mhm.
Now I do. Right? Because one of the biggest challenges that I see with change is people seeing, if I accept that this is true, then I have to acknowledge all of those times in the past I've harmed somebody else. And that's a lot of weight to take on. So we've all done the best we can to get
Mhm.
through all of this. So when we do this to others, and I knew what abuse looked like, and I had like I'd volunteered, like I'd been on, call center phones, whatever. I knew what it looked like, and I still, during the first early years of this relationship that I'm in, found myself sometimes resorting to tactics that I know are abusive. Gaslighting, lying to not have that conversation right now, right? Manipulation through emoting or through not emoting, right? Like how many times have you said, like, to shut down a conversation, you've been like, it's fine. They know it's not fine. You know it's not fine, but it makes them second guess how they feel, right? Especially if you can really lock that down. That's not nice. That's fucking with their reality. It's abusive, right? What does this look like, right? And Amanda, you mentioned, going after their car with a baseball bat, right? Like that's anytime that you've ever like seen something like that happen, or if you've even walked out to your car and noticed that it's been harmed, like damaged in some way, the shock initially, what that does physiologically to your body, even if you didn't see the bat hitting the window, even if, it wasn't done to you, physiologically, you have a reaction that is a threat to your safety. Like back in the lizard brain, it doesn't matter if you're, if you outweigh them by 110 pounds, it doesn't matter if it happened like it matters from a gut instinct, lizard brain survival perspective. These are things we have to pay attention to. And a big one that I'm seeing right now, specifically from women to men, but also it's done from men to women and from everyone to everyone all the freaking time, is pushing for sexual intimacy before the other person is ready. Mm-hmm. So when men do this to women or other non-men, it's often seen as non-consensual, as sexual assault, as when it is done by men to men, that's just accepted, right? Mm-hmm. And when it's done from non-men to men, it's done as accepted and with a heaping side of shame. Because mm-hmm. real men always want sex.
Yeah.
I did that in my marriage. I didn't realize, but sexual intimacy was a big part of how I connect with my partner. And when he didn't want it, it made me feel shame. So I piled the shame onto him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this really brings up a good kind of point around how, and we talked about it like pre-episode 2, around like how society in general tends to learn to view men, because that's how men start to experience some abuse in their relationships is, well, you're supposed to be this big, tough, strong dude. Why are you crying right now? You shouldn't be crying right now. Or you don't make enough money, so you're not able to support our family. So what are you really bringing to this relationship or bringing to our family here? You're a guy, you should always want to have sex. So why don't you want to have sex right now? When we as a society have all collectively learned to view men in a very specific way and learn what it means to be a man, not only does that set men up to potentially be abusive in their relationships because we don't have the skill set to be able to communicate effectively, we don't have the ability to express or feel any other emotions besides anger, but it also sets us up to experience some abuse. Because for anyone who listens who has seen a photo of me, I'm not the big, tough, strong dude. You probably could have guessed that from the way that I sound on the podcast. I'm not, I already told you, I'm an emotional person. I'm not the breadwinner in my relationship. I don't fit what our society has deemed to be masculine. And if I feel that way about myself, and I feel like, well, I'm not living up to my expectations, that's detrimental to my mental health. But on the flip side, if I'm in a relationship with someone who believes that as a man, I'm supposed to fulfill that role, and I don't, they can start to use that against me to gain power over me in that relationship, to make me feel worthless, to make me feel like I'm not good enough. Mm-hmm. And that can be how that abuse starts to really play out in relationships where men are abused by women. And it's why I say that feminism works for all of us, not just women. Because if we can break down that gender roles, yes, you can be the big, tough, strong dude who makes a lot of money. That's perfectly fine. But if that is the expectation for you, that is the only way then that you can be a man. And there's more than one way for us to be men.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so if we look at, how are men primed for abuse? And I will say that men are primed for abuse in the same way that they are primed to abuse. Mm-hmm. All of these things lead to the same end result. You were talking about, Sean, you were talking about how men might have just that, stoic and angry. The challenge that we have is that many men are primed for abuse in the same way that they prime for abuse. So when we talk about what does abuse look like, one of the main factors of an abusive relationship that we have a tendency to look for from the outside is isolation, right? We're going to isolate that victim, take away their support systems, take away their friends, take away their family, take away the second, third, and 100th set of eyes on that relationship so that they are in a bubble that I can manipulate and change. We have a male loneliness epidemic going on here. And it's not just, we talk about it in terms of like romantic relationships, but it's so much deeper than that. It's also male friendships, having friends who you not only go out and like have a beer with and joke around with and whatever, but somebody that you can say, hey, I'm really sad and I need to talk to somebody about this. Do you have time? And which is one of the reasons that when I'm talking with like, these newly divorced, middle-aged Gen X men, I'm like, tell me about your friends, because we might need to get you a friend group while you are learning to date for you to have a healthy relationship going forward, because many men are going into the relationship already emotionally isolated. And then in that relationship, when it starts well, they start to learn this person, this human is who I can be safe being happy around, who I can be safe being a little bit sad around, and so on and so forth. So all of the emotions, aside from stoicism and anger and maybe hold my beer, end up in that relationship with him, on that person, that woman, that man, that NB, whoever he is in a relationship with. That is the one person who can hold all of his emotions. And that also gives that one person the ability to shape his emotional reality. And again, let me also be very clear. When we talk about abuse, when I talk about abuse, I am talking about abusive behavior that harms emotionally or physically. I am not talking about intent. And I think that that's very critical to understand, because one, I don't believe that most people who are emotionally abusive or even physically abusive a lot of the times, especially when you just haul off and slap somebody because they just pissed you the fuck off. I have always wanted to dump a drink on someone's lap or throw it in their face. I haven't gotten a chance yet. One day. It just feels so empowering. Like, you cad, right? Like this. But I don't think that when I have invalidated my ex-husband, when I shamed him for not wanting sex with me, I wasn't thinking, oh gosh, I feel really bad, I should offset that badness by making him feel awful, right? Like, I didn't go through that thought process. Of course, that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
But I was not self-aware enough to do that with intention.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have done these things in the past, when you have told your son or your brother or your father or your husband or whatever, or, a friend, or when you have seen a friend told, that is not manly, that is not masculine, you need to stop it. That is very, very rarely done with intention. Doesn't make the harm any less.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it might make it worse, because if the guy realizes, oh, they're just saying that to hurt me,
Yeah.
they may be less hurt, right? But if you
Yeah.
truly believe it in that moment, that's cutting. So I think that that's also really important to sort of touch on, is that The people who have a tendency to abuse men intentionally are other men on social media
Mhm.
telling them you have to be like this and you can buy my $15,000 course in order to do so.
Yeah.
Right, or join my men going their own way
Mhm.
group, or join us gym cell bros and get the six-pack abs that'll make women love you, or whatever it is.
Mhm.
That is intentional abuse. That's manipulation in order to make a sale. But
Yeah.
what happens most often is not intentional. It
Mhm.
was not intentional when I did it. It was, I would even go so far as to say it was not intentional when my husband abused me. He was bipolar and he had issues and whatever. That doesn't reduce the harm.
Yeah.
And it's the harm that we need to look at. What are we doing to each other?
Mhm. Yeah. It's when I talk, even when I talk about like racism and stuff too, it's like I bring that point up. It's like it doesn't matter what you intended by what you said or what you were doing. What was the result of what you said or did? Like that's the part that matters. Your intent. You might have been very well intentioned,
Mhm.
but if what you did or said caused harm, that still caused harm. And it's when we are creating, and we as a society tend to create more spaces for women who have experienced harm than we do for men. So if we already have men who have that, like have a male loneliness issue because we don't have strong enough connections with other men, we only feel like we can gain that from having a relationship with women. But if we aren't able to be a full person, we are only able to be this list or this caricature of what we think a man is supposed to be. The odds of us having that good, healthy relationship aren't probably very high. So we don't have relationships with other men. We can't get a relationship with women. So it's no surprise that we then have those men who are able to manipulate other men to buy their courses, to get them to follow them online because those are the men who are saying everything that guy wants to hear. I can help you get women. I can help you combat all of these issues that society says is wrong with you because you're a man. When in reality, all they're doing is seeing the opportunity to just manipulate men further. All it is doing then is further isolating them from other people to have healthier relationships. They're going to further believe that it's the people around them who are the issue, so they're never going to work on it. And they're never also going to look in the mirror and say, hey, maybe I don't want to be like this. Maybe I want to be able to express other emotions. Maybe I want to be able to hug my friend and make them feel comforted instead of just being like, that sucks, bro. But when
That's
we're told we can't do that, we're never going to be able to have truly good, healthy relationships with anyone.
Especially if you just paid $15,000 for a course that told you that you don't have to do those things and that all of the things that you are about you are just perfect the way they are. The rest of the world just doesn't understand it, and it's because you're an alpha male.
Yeah.
yeah, the whole like lone wolf, alpha male, sigma wizard, warlock thing
Hmm.
is is out of control.
Yeah. And it's like I see it and I see it all the time. Like even my students like will talk about it sometimes. And I'm like, guys, we need other connection. Like you need to be able to have good friendships with people. Because there's a reason that as men get older, we have a harder time maintaining relationships with our friends. And it is strictly because we don't open up to them. Because once we get older, I can't go out drinking with my friends every weekend now. So
Mhm.
I can't put myself in the situation where I can be open with them because once I drink a little bit, it's perfectly okay and socially acceptable for me to do that. So
I
if I
love you, man.
yeah, so if I
Mhm.
can't do that now, what is allow what do I have in my toolkit that allows for me to maintain a good relationship with my friends if alcohol is now removed from the equation? So we
Well, and
have yeah.
that's the same thing that people who are going through trying to have some sobriety are feeling, right?
Yep.
And i- if we take that alcohol out of the equation, if we take that bar out of the equation, or the club or the whatever, where are you supposed to hang out with your friends? Where are you supposed to meet them? Where are you supposed to have a conversation that doesn't at least in some way revolve around the drinking or the drugs or the whatever that you were doing? And that can be really hard for men who are trying to have a little bit of that emotional capacity, but we've taken out this one piece that allows them to have it.
So you're looking at not just the lifestyle, right? Like this is what I do with my friends. We go out, right?
Mhm.
But also the bonding when we go out and we all drink together, we are bonded as an in group, right?
Mhm.
And then you're also taking the one thing that makes it accessible and acceptable, like accessible, your emotions, acceptable to have them,
Mhm.
right? Like it's the one thing that, men can get tipsy and start talking about their feelings. But if you're just like standing around, sober, you're like, hey, I've been feeling kind of sad. Oh, butter up, like you can do this, champ, like
Yeah.
this is not the time, right?
Mhm.
So that's huge. I mean, if you think about it in terms of any sort of behavior modification, addiction, like, people who are going on a diet who spend most of their social time with friends eating,
Yeah.
right? You've got the same type of issue when you're sitting around, you're drinking your Ritas and you're eating nachos and you're talking smack. If that is no longer a part of your life, now what? Right? How do you get that same release? And when we remove this, so one of the ways that is socially acceptable for women to isolate men even more is to say you can't go out drinking with your friends. Not we, like, for example, Sean, you've got a new baby, right? So here's the situation. We're both parents. We're both exhausted, right? As things begin to settle down a little bit, looking at, okay, so at least one night a week, one person takes over all the responsibilities so the other person can do diddly squat. It might be diddly squat taking a nice hot bath and reading a book. It might be diddly squat, napping on the sofa. It might be diddly squat going out and drinking with friends and having a good time. It might be, golfing, whatever it is. But each of us gets, a full 6 hour period where we have zero responsibilities, barring an actual emergency,
Mhm.
both of you, right? Like,
Yeah.
so you get to have adult connections. And then eventually raise that up to 2 nights for each of you a week, right? So then again, you're almost back to a normalized adult schedule, right? Um, but that's one of the things that most family units cannot do for two reasons. One, because oftentimes the men do not step up and actually
Mhm.
give that support to the mother with the
Yep.
child, with the house, and so on and so forth. So since they're constantly trying to avoid it, the last thing she wants is to give him even more freedom to go out, right? So that's not a conversation we're having. And then the
Mhm.
second thing is that that's for children. I think what you do with your friends is stupid and immature, like video game playing and drinking.
Uh-huh.
And therefore, you cannot do that because you are a father and an adult man now.
Yeah. Yeah. And which is great because my partner and I have kind of like figured it out at least a little bit in like the now 5, almost 6 months that we've had our son. Like we just play video games together with my friends. And if he needs his diaper changed, she'll do it the first time, I'll do the second time. So like we figured out like those compromises to where we can still have that adult interaction with our friends. Um, but I want to make it clear to the listeners here that it sounds like we're harping a lot on like masculinity and like how we've learned to view men and all this stuff. But that is because the way that society has learned to view men often does set us up for experiencing abuse. Because, like you were talking about, Heather, like when we learn to view men in a very specific way, whenever we're encountering a man who doesn't quite fit that bill,
Mhm.
well, we can say what we want to say to that person to then manipulate them, be like, "Oh, you're not good enough," or that I, social isolation. That is a weird combination of words that I didn't think was gonna trip me up there. But that social isolation, I did it again. Social isolation. Um, because yeah, it's something that a lot of men probably have heard before is like, oh, you can't go out with your friends tonight because we have to do something else. Well, that slowly starts to pull you away from your friends. You can't do that activity because it's silly. My friends and I, there's like every like a almost like a 2 year window, like clockwork. We'll be like, we haven't played Yu-Gi-Oh in a while. So like we'll pull out all our Yu-Gi-Oh decks and like we'll play for like 2 weeks and then they'll go back into the back of the closet, hidden from anyone to ever see, and then we'll just forget about it for 2 years. We legitimately all had hiding places in our house for our Yu-Gi-Oh cards so our partners wouldn't find them at one point. Because we were all worried that if our partners found them, they were gonna think we were weird and not want to date us anymore.
Okay, so there's another abuse point. Finding those things and tossing them.
Yeah.
I don't know a single man who's had long-term relationships that didn't have something important to him thrown away by a partner who thought it was silly. An old t-shirt, like a band t-shirt, or, like a favorite pair of holy underwear or whatever. Like the idea that you are incapable of taking care of yourself and I must take care of you, which then is also very much a product of our own um, feminine requirements, right? Like, I have to do this, or I am not being a good wife, a good partner, a good girlfriend, or whatever. And if somebody out there sees you in this t-shirt, I will feel shame because I am not, you know, dating somebody who has better style sense, who, I am not taking care of his clothing properly. I am not doing this. The shame escalation in relationship conflict is so powerful and strong. And a lot of the ways that we mistreat our partners are a direct result of how we see ourselves or how we think we're supposed to be seen.
It's
Also, I really want to touch on one thing because I think it's
Mhm.
really critical. Social isolation. When
You said
there's
that
been
so much better than me.
there's been some studies done on how how resilient people are when it comes to things like social rejection. And they did this study where a bunch of people came in and they were like essentially using like a dating app, a friend type swipe app on the computer, right? And they were supposed to choose which of these people look like people you might be interested in. So they chose. And then, one group was given, oh, these are the people that matched with you, blah, blah, blah. Probably wasn't true, but, about 50%, whatever. And then the other group was told that these imaginary people, none of them matched with them, right? So they felt rejected by people they didn't even know. The thing that was fascinating about this is that they didn't do it to make them, feel rejected specifically. They made them feel rejected to then study whether or not they would be more empathetic or less empathetic after that happened. So then they told them stories about like this one person who had a heartbreak and this one person who had a broken leg. And they, had them rate the stories. After feeling rejection, their empathy levels went down overall. They did not go up. So their hurt made them feel less empathetic towards others' hurt. And they were way less empathetic towards the emotional pain of heartbreak than they were to the broken leg.
Interesting.
But there was a blip that was really interesting. The people in that study who had been totally rejected, but who also had at least one person in their lives that they said was like their ride or die, would support them, would like they could tell anything to, accepted them, loved them, their empathy barely fell at all. That I've got goosebumps right now just saying it. Like that is so powerful. If you think about, again, social isolation, social isolation is almost built in to a lot of them, right? Whereas with women, the men socially isolate, or the abuser, because it could be anybody, socially isolates in order so that when she feels hurt, she is less likely to go to other people and less likely to care about other people and really go inward into herself. So, anything where you can't say no to me because I love you. You can't leave me because you promised me. You can't leave me because I will self-harm. You can't do things with your friends because that's childish and you're a father now, right? Like all of these things. You can't do that because that's not masculine. You can't do that because that's not what a good wife would do. Like all of these things, we know what abuse looks like as long as we're willing to look at it from a masculine lens. If somebody did this to me, how would I feel? If somebody invalidated me, if somebody told me I was not a good woman, I was not a good wife, if I did this, then when somebody says you're not a good boyfriend if you don't do this thing I want you to do that you don't feel comfortable doing, that's abusive behavior.
And I would challenge, if there are any men listening to this, I would challenge you to like talk to your friends about this too. Like if you've experienced some of these things, talk to your friends about it because I am willing to bet they may have experienced some of these similar things as well. And they're afraid to talk about it because as men, we are taught be afraid to talk about these things because it makes you look girly and that's bad. Because like I'm willing to bet if I were to talk to my friends about like, oh yeah, I stopped wearing all of my like nerdy looking clothes because I was like, no girl's gonna want me if I wear those clothes because I've heard from a partner that that makes me look like a child. I avoid some activities because my partner thought those were childish or they didn't like when I did those. It's like I stopped talking to some people or like started talking to my friends less because of not doing those activities. Like if I was a woman talking about those things and saying my partner controlled what I was wearing, controlled what I was doing, and I started losing my friends, that is
Oh, the whole man.
immediate. Immediate. That is
Red
abuse.
flag. The challenge is, I think a lot of the times though, is that what we see people doing this to themselves.
Yeah.
So we're like, oh, he's just being an asshole. He's too good to play D&D with us anymore now that he's got a real girlfriend.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, to avoid that type of abuse that, we inflict upon ourselves, I think it's important to really, change the narrative as to, how do we get relationships? Because, Sean, one of the things that really struck me after our last conversation was when you talked about, and we touched on it here in this one, when you talked about gaming and how you got to play games. Like this is a part of your life. This is a part of your relationship. And my perspective is if like you're out there and you're somebody who enjoys gaming, that you should find a partner who enjoys you gaming, or
Yeah.
at least is like my partner, he has 5 bicycles. 5. He's got a road bike. He's got a gravel bike. He's got a mountain bike. He's got a fixie, and he's got a stationary trainer that's actually a bike. 5. I do not bicycle. I think he's insane. Like he literally like falls over with his bike and rolls down like hills and mountains and shit. And but I love it for him. Partially because I believe everybody should have something they're passionate about, partially because it keeps his butt looking super cute, and partially because it gets him out of my hair on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Right? But he is also the kind of adult that I would not have to say, hey, you have been riding your bicycle for 6 hours every night this week. And I know that that is something that with gamers sometimes happens, right? So like there's the being an adult and creating a sustainable relationship for you and the person you want in your life. And there is also not compromising on the things that are truly important to you.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the idea that we talked about in the last one, where if you really, really want to avoid any type of abuse in a relationship, build strong boundaries.
Yeah.
And know what you're willing to do and not do.
Yeah.
And then stick to it.
Yep. And if you're curious about how to do that, check out our last episode with Heather because we talk
That's
all
right.
about them.
We do. We talk all about boundaries.
And one of the things I want to leave the listeners and stuff with is being true to yourself also is a really great way to make sure that you're gauging on if this is a relationship you want to pursue or not. When I was engaging in relationships where I was afraid to wear my Pokemon t-shirts, where I was afraid to play Pokemon or play video games, where I was afraid to pull up my Yu-Gi-Oh cards and hang out with my friends and just nerd out all day. When I was in relationships where I was afraid to do those things, those were the ones that I was the least happy in, which also then led me to be kind of shitty in those relationships. But it's when you're true to yourself, it allows for you to find people who are going to at least maybe not match it. My partner will not play Yu-Gi-Oh with me and my friends, but she will play video games, or she understands that that's something that I want to do. My wife loves to read, so it creates a good time frame where she can read, where I'm not annoying the shit out of her because I'm playing video games. So when you're true to yourself, it allows for you to find people who are going to also accept those parts of you. And so you don't have to feel like you have to hide all of that. Because when you're able to be yourself, that is when you're going to be happy.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be playing video games or watching movies where you cry, things like that. My husband loves to ice fish, apparently. That makes zero sense to me. He's asked me if I wanted to go, and I'm like, first of all, I don't like fishing. Second of all, I don't like being cold. And third, you're going out on water and drilling a hole through it, and absolutely not. Not a single one of those things makes sense to me. But you want to go, so you can go with your friends and you can go ice fishing, and I will sit here under my heated blanket with the dog and I'll read a book. And we can just both be happy about that. So everybody should have some of their own hobbies. Would he love it if I went out ice fishing with him? Probably, but also a little bit like that's his time with his friends too.
Yes, that.
So let him have that and let me read a smutty novel. Like
That's just so freaking huge. Like I talk a lot about like radical authenticity and like figuring out your boundaries and figuring out your standards and things like that. And one of the challenges is we all kind of find ourselves in relationships where especially when we're young, where we have maybe sanded off all the rough edges that don't quite fit into the puzzle piece shape that we think we're supposed to be in. And then we get out of that relationship and suddenly we're hit with the realization that we are more than that person's emotional support toaster, right? Like we have value and quirkiness and ideas and thoughts that we haven't remembered for, the past year because we were too busy trying to be someone else.
Mhm.
And then add to that the idea of stoicism, right? The lack of emotions that many men are very like settled into because they don't really have an outlet. And that's when I say get help.
Yeah.
It does not, and I'm going to be very clear here because like a lot of people, get help. Oh, I don't need therapy. It does not have to be therapy.
Mhm.
It can be a coach. It can be a mentor. It can be a friend who is somehow like living life to the fullest and sucking the marrow out of each day. Like, get help figuring out who you are, who you want to be, what you want to explore. Fling yourself into passion after passion after passion. Like, figure that out because one of the challenges that we all have going from one relationship to another with a bunch of tiny little daily abuses, piled upon bigger, piled upon smaller, like ongoing, right? Just because a lot of us are just really shitty at relationshiping. When we go from one relationship to the other and we don't give ourselves time in between to figure out who we are, to set those boundaries, to set those standards, to say, I will never be in another relationship that, and I will never have a relationship that doesn't, right? Like just those types of things. Then we're constantly just ebbing and flowing with what we think other people require of us,
Mhm.
what we should do to be successful, to, be a family person or whatever.
Yeah.
And for a lot of my clients, my male clients, I am their primary friend for several months
Mhm.
once I meet them. And yes, they're paying me, but like we're actually friends
Mhm.
because that's what they need. They need a friend who
Yeah.
can then walk them through, what do you really want out of this? Well,
Mhm.
I don't know. Okay, well, let's ask you some questions, right? How would you put that into a dating profile? How would you like talk to people about it, and so on and so forth. So one of the key factors to any of this and to any sort of abuse, masculine or feminine, is have those friends, hold them close, get their opinions on what's going on, because you're not always going to see it when it's happening to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Heather. We have really enjoyed this conversation. Um, Before we sign out, if someone wanted to find you on social media, where could they find you?
Curiouser.life, my.curiouser.life is probably the best place right now. I'm super trying to avoid social media as much as possible.
I don't
I'm
blame you.
really bad at it because of my ADHD. But if you go to my.curiouser.life and scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's a link on how to contact me. And if you send in a contact and you say, hey, I have a question about this, I can get you onto the right email list or shoot you over to the right products or whatever it is. Right now, I'm really, really focused on just like connecting with people specifically and like talking to them through, my own channels, email and that sort of thing.
Cool. Well, I will make sure I have a link to that in the show notes for our listeners. And thank you for joining us, Heather. And thank you all for listening today. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and LinkedIn at Touchy Subs Pod to keep up to date when we have new episodes and other content coming out. Please email us any questions, comments, or concerns to touchysubjectspodcast@gmail.com. And please rate and follow us on your favorite podcast listening app. It really does help the show out.
And in the meantime, don't be afraid to challenge, ask, and discuss when it comes to touchy subjects.